Welcome back to another camper build series video. We are getting very close to finishing up this project. Today we will be covering our camper in aluminum sheet metal to give the camper a very professional and finished look. If you find this video helpful or interesting, please consider subscribing to this channel and liking the video. I try to respond to all comments on these videos, so if you have a question or just want to say hi, add a comment below. In our last video, we prepped the camper for primer, so today we are able to start painting right away. I am using Kills Mold and Mildew Primer. This is mostly just in case any moisture makes its way underneath the aluminum. I bought an airless paint sprayer for paint jobs just like this. For me, the $200 investment was absolutely worth it to be able to get paint projects done faster. I used the Graco TrueCoat 360 dual speed sprayer. A link to the sprayer and all other materials can be found in the description of this video. I let the primer dry overnight, and the next morning I'm ready to start adding my aluminum siding. To start, I cut a piece of bottom trim that will hold up my aluminum sheets while they're being installed. I have a previous video about the aluminum installation process, but since then, I've learned a lot about how to make the installation better. In the previous video, I used silicone underneath the aluminum sheets to hold it onto the camper. This caused the aluminum to bend, bubble, and ripple when it got hot. Aluminum expands under heat, so you have to leave room for it to move. So with this build, all of the aluminum is just held on by the trim. It is a process which many refer to as floating. There is no glue or silicone holding on the aluminum against the camper, and there are no screws drilled through the aluminum sheets. Instead, I add my bottom piece of aluminum trim, then I rest the aluminum sheet onto the screws of the aluminum trim. I then make sure that the other trim pieces and screws leave at least 1/8 of an inch on every side to allow for the expansion of the metal. In order to do this, I use a piece of scrap trim and mark on my camper where all of the screw holes will be. I then measure and cut the aluminum sheet to sit 1/8 of an inch inside of all the screws. It makes the process quite a bit slower, but it makes the finished product look much better. To cut my aluminum sheets down to size before putting them on the camper, I use a jigsaw with a sheet metal blade. My advice here is to go slow. Forcing it will cause the teeth to catch and could bend your sheet aluminum. Once the sheets are mounted onto the camper, I use my router with a flush trim bit to cut out my doors and vents. This makes a huge mess with the aluminum, but it is fast and it is very precise. I highly suggest using a mask and glasses when doing this. Aluminum dust can wreak havoc on the respiratory system and has even been linked to brain disease. Be careful and always use your protective equipment. Once the aluminum sheets are in place on the camper, I also need to make small holes for any exterior electrical. This includes my exterior floodlights, exterior waterproof USB ports, and holes for solar panel cables. To keep water out, I add silicone between the aluminum sheet and the trim before tightening down my trim screws, but I make sure those screws aren't overly tight. Doing this allows just enough wiggle room for the aluminum to expand, while also keeping out any water from the rain and snow. I only do this on the bottom trim and the trim on the roof. After the whole project is done, I will go back with some black silicone and seal up all of the exterior seams where the aluminum sheets and trim meet, similar to what you would do when caulking up a bathtub. Here's a peek at the camper with 80% of the trim done. I feel like it turned out really good, and I love the way it looks. Some of the angled trim pieces can be a pain and take some time to think through, but if you go slow and really think through each cut, you can end up with a really well finished exterior on your camper. Someday I plan to replace the homemade rear galley door with a manufactured side swinging door. To make it a little bit easier to pull off the aluminum and trim at the back of the camper, I use butyl tape instead of silicone, which will hopefully be easier to remove when the time comes. Before finishing up the day, I add the hurricane hinge for my rear galley door. With this done, we will be close to finishing up our camper in the next few days. I hope you have enjoyed this video and that you have found the information helpful. Please leave a comment if you have any questions about this camper build. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. We would love to have you along for our adventures.